As Christians, we're not always honest about the difficulties we have reading the Gospels. I find some of the most difficult passages to read with any application, with any focused attention, are the miracle stories in the Gospels. And the reason is because I've heard these stories since I was a child. I heard them in Sunday school classrooms. I've read them again and again. I feel like I know these stories well. But I also feel like there's a distance between the situation of some of the characters in these stories and my own situation. So when I read a familiar story about a leper being healed, or about a blind man receiving his sight, I'm not blind and I don't have leprosy, and so it's easy for me just to pass quickly through that terrain thinking I've been here before, and to not really know how to meditate, how to apply these stories of Jesus' miracles. Now maybe you have that same struggle, and if you do, this hymn is for us, because this hymn is going to actually push us to do something with these stories that we maybe haven't done in a very long time. Maybe we've never done it. To actually use these stories as a template to understand how we can ask for God's grace and how we can look for Jesus to do things in our lives that aren't dissimilar to what he did to those people 2,000 years ago. Now, what I want to do is I want to start by reading these first two stanzas. And they're going to position us to be able to reflect upon the miracles of Jesus in a special way. The hymn, it starts like this. Jesus, if still thou art today as yesterday the same, present to heal, in me display the virtue of thy name. If still thou goest about to do thy needy creatures good, on me, that I thy praise may show, be all thy wonders showed. Now there's a word, it's a short word, it's a little word, if, but it's a word that we have to think about. When the hymn writer says, if thou art today as yesterday the same, he's not saying, well, maybe this is, maybe it's not the case. It's not that kind of if. This is what we might call an if of implication. Because Jesus is the same, we're coming toward him and asking him to do in us and to show the same virtue or strength that he has in us that he showed to people when he was walking about Palestine so long ago. Now, the third stanza, pay attention, this is where we get a little bit closer to understanding what this hymn is about. Now, Lord, to whom for help I call, thy miracles repeat. With pitying eyes behold me fall, a leper at thy feet. Now, I just want to pause on that statement, thy miracles repeat. Think about how different it would be to step into the Gospels, to read these miracle stories, actually asking Jesus to repeat his miracles in our life. Now that raises a question. What is the nature of these miracles? If we're not blind, if we're not deaf, if we're not lepers, what are we asking for? And that's exactly what this hymn is so helpful with clarifying. Now, the first miracle that the hymn is asking Christ to repeat is he's asking him to repeat the healing, the cleansing of the leper. But notice this fourth stanza. Look at what the leprosy refers to. Loathsome and foul and self-abhorred, I sink beneath my sin. But if thou wilt, a gracious word of thine can make me clean. Now we might think this is just an allegorization of the miracle. Well, not really, because actually our sin is a much deeper form of uncleanness and unhealth or of sickness than leprosy is. So to take leprosy and to see that as representing our condition before God, that's not some sort of exaggeration or manipulation of the text. It's rather recognizing that the deepest work that Jesus is doing is not simply healing a skin disease. He's healing the disease of the heart. That's what we're asking him to do in our lives. Now this next stanza picks up two different miracle stories. It says, Thou seest me deaf to thy commands. Open, O Lord, my ear. Bid me stretch out my withered hand and lift them up in prayer. This idea that there's a deafness that's more profound than not being able to hear sound. It's a deafness to the commands of God where we ignore what he's saying to us, asking that our ear might be opened, that phrase that we read in the Old Testament so often, that we might have open ears to the command of God, but equally withered hands, hands that are meant to be stretched out in prayer, but instead we're not reaching toward God in prayer, that God would give us the strength to stretch our hands out that we take that posture of dependence on him. Again, next stanza, we pick up another miracle. Silent, alas, thou knowest how long, my voice I cannot raise. But oh, when thou shalt loose my tongue, the dumb shall sing thy praise. Do you not often find it difficult, a reluctance, an incapacity to praise God? Well, here's taking that example of Jesus who could give the dumb the ability to speak, that he can take us in our silence and he can fill our mouth with praise of God. Do you not long for that? If so, use that story as a picture of what Christ could do in your life. Another miracle story. Lame at the pool, I still am found. Give and my strength employ. Light as a hart, I then shall bound. The lame shall leap for joy. Again, you picture that person who couldn't walk next to the pool waiting to be healed. Jesus, that ability to take the person who cannot walk and make them like a hart, make them like a rabbit, a hare, a deer that can suddenly leap through the field, that he's able to do the same for us, that we can all of a sudden use our strength to serve him with joy, with vigor. And then one last miracle story that we pick up in this hymn. Blind from my birth to guilt in thee, and dark I am within. The love of God I cannot see, the sinfulness of sin. This idea that we can be blind both to the love of God, but also to the wickedness of our sin. But here the hymn writer, he's positioning us like Bartimaeus. Remember when Bartimaeus was on the side of the road, Jesus is going through Jerusalem. This is Bartimaeus' opportunity to cry out, receive the mercy that he needs. The hymn says, but thou, they say, art passing by. O let me find thee near. Jesus, in mercy, hear my cry. Thou Son of David, hear. Long have I waited in the way for thee, the heavenly light. Command me to be brought and say, sinner, receive thy sight. All of a sudden, we find ourselves in that position of Bartimaeus, crying out to Jesus that he would come and heal us so that we could see more of his love, that we could also see more of the darkness of our sin and long for that sin to be put to death in our lives. Let me just leave you where we began, and that is that when we come to these miracle stories, it's easy just to pass by them and think that we already know what they contain. What we need to realize is these miracle stories, these are food for prayer. And what we need to do is contemplatively to position ourselves and to think of the similarity. How am I like a leper? How am I like a blind person? How am I like someone who cannot speak, someone whose hands are withered, someone whose feet are lame? And then recognizing that weakness to cry out and ask Jesus, as this hymn boldly suggests, that he would repeat his miracles in our lives. Friends, if you will learn to do that, those stories, they will feed your soul. They will push you into greater intimacy with Jesus. And as you reach that place of humility, they will actually result in God filling you with his grace and with his strength.